Today, long-haul jets fly holidaymakers to America, Asia and Africa. And as a proportion of income, it costs no more than the old trip to the seaside, and often the time spent travelling is little more. Kenya needs tourists. At least it needs the foreign exchange they bring. Vast amounts of money have been spent on attracting these tourists. In 1991, there were 800,000 visitors who spent $400 million. This makes tourism Kenya's biggest earner of foreign exchange. Most tourists still come for the seaside, usually the coral beaches near Mombasa. Any resort, anywhere.
Tourism is one of the most important industries in the country. Kenya has invested very heavily in the tourism industry in terms of hotels and wildlife conservation and a lot of other infrastructure which has been targeted directly at promoting the tourism industry.
Once upon a time, people came to Kenya to see wild animals. But for the majority of visitors today, the only glimpse of wildlife they have are the artificially created centres close to the hotels.
The present infrastructure cannot support much more inflow of tourists, but that really is a problem of investment. So long as tourists are bringing in much needed foreign exchange and they are a stimulant to the domestic economy, then it is justifiable to invest in expansion of infrastructure.
And some of that money is invested in typically Western attractions like nature trails. Only 1 kilometre from the Indian Ocean, the nature trail at Bamburi is part of a world-renowned reclamation project created out of the quarries left by the country's biggest cement factory. Today, it's a highly developed biosystem, but it was not always like this. It was started in 1971 by Bamburi Cement Company, and reclamation continues today, much of it using the money paid by tourists. The cement factory extracts coral limestone to produce cement. The quarrying leaves behind a devastated landscape. But as soon as the lorries leave, casuarina trees are planted. These are the only trees whose roots can penetrate the reclaimed land and survive in the heat and saline conditions. Soil from the quarry itself and humus from the more established woodland are mixed together to increase the tree's chances of survival. In the nursery, the trees are carefully looked after before planting out. They grow quickly in the tropical conditions. These are only 3 years old. Millipedes are introduced to eat the fallen leaves and enrich the developing soil.
The moment you start bringing in a creature, it was growing too fast or just went out of hands until you had the controlling factors in it. So the bigger the diversity of plants, of animals, also insects, what I brought in, reptiles, was the more balanced the system got.
Now it is balanced, and for many tourists and local school children, their only chance to see wild animals in anything like natural conditions.
Industry and nature don't have to be at loggerheads, that one can do something which is even better and nicer than it was before. We can give a sanctuary for plants and animals which are endangered.
There are indeed few tourist developments in the world that have this sensitivity to nature.
We believe that it is a very attractive tourist destination. And the only thing which can keep tourists from coming to Kenya is possibly if it is too expensive for them to come here, in which case we will be required to address that competitiveness problem, or if it's an unstable environment and therefore it is dangerous for tourists to come.
Go down, go down, go down.
I'm coming down.
Go down. Go down with it.
I'm coming down.
No, 750 is my last word. Really?
Of course, tourists cannot be guaranteed. Recession in Europe and America, or adverse publicity, can cause the number of tourists to fall dramatically. Kenya's economy suffers, as do people who rely on tourism for their income. And tourists expect a great deal from a holiday. A swimming pool is a must, if only to learn scuba diving. But water is not plentiful around Mombasa. The main sources of water are the rivers, but there are underground supplies, some of it fresh, some salty, but only for those who can afford to drill for it. Hotels and successful businesses, they have the money. Local people, of course, do not. The Arab community in this area of Mombasa are traders. They own shops and warehouses, and for most of them, water is no problem. But most of the African citizens work in the tourist industry, and their average income is the equivalent of 50 pence a day. They cannot afford to drill for water, and instead, they have to buy it from street traders. Some local villages are more fortunate. They have a well. However, many women have to walk long distances to collect the water. Tourists bring much-needed money into the country, and certainly they do create service jobs for Kenyans. And yet, it would take 8 years for these fishermen to earn the cost of the cheapest 2-week Kenyan holiday.
Yeah, okay. All right, yeah.
The tourist industry has an environmental as well as an economic effect. The Kenyan coast is coral. The reefs are now being destroyed, partly by pollution and silt brought down by the rivers, and partly by the activities of tourists who walk on the coral or anchor boats to it.
Spider.
These tourists have deserted the beach. They're on safari to see Kenya's wildlife. Their destination, one of Kenya's national parks. Run by the Kenyan Wildlife Service, national parks are designed to protect areas of natural beauty and the wild animals who live there. This is the Rift Valley. Evidence of recent Earth movement can be seen everywhere in Hell's Gate National Park. It's impressive, but not all that accessible from the coast. And it's made infinitely less attractive by the recently built geothermal plant. Most visitors on a day-long safari from the coast come to Amboseli. Although one of the smallest parks, it is the most accessible. Amboseli is a Maasai word for low, wet place. Wild animals have always come here in the dry season for water and grazing. The money the tourists pay to enter the park, about £10 sterling each, is used to protect the animals. Part of the money is used to dig ditches to stop tourist buses getting too close to the animals. The most popular animals are the lions, elephants, giraffes, rhinos and cheetahs. Known as the Big Five, these are what the tourists come to see. At the end of the drive, the tourists compare notes.
Oh, we've seen 3 of the big 5, and like 200 kinds of birds.
Hippo, yes. Rhinoceros, gazelles, elephants, Thompson gazelles. Let's see, impalas. And today we saw a harem of impalas. Harem of impalas. So the
A rhino. We saw a rhino.
And is it as you expected?
Oh yes, more than we expected, really.
Yes, much more.
Much
than
more,
we expected.
much more,
Much,
yes.
much more quantity of animals.
But Amboseli is a victim of its own success. Protection has meant more animals, but this has led to overgrazing and the destruction of the vegetation. It's then just a short step to dust storms and soil erosion. And it's all made worse by the tourist buses. And if the dust gets too bad, the animals quite simply leave the area, creating other problems outside the park. Here, the government has encouraged farmers to settle and grow crops. Their crops are now often trampled by the wild animals. The Kenyan Wildlife Service pays for any damage done, but nobody compensates the original people from this area. The Maasai are not farmers. They're nomadic herdsmen who once roamed freely across the southern half of Kenya. Amboseli provided grazing during the dry season. Today, they can only take their cattle into the parks for water. They cannot graze them there. They're being forced to settle.
The Maasai have a lot of problems. That is, since they have started settling down or having permanent homes, it's difficult for them to move their animals as they used to do before. So you find that animals also, together with the human, are having quite some problems to solve within themselves. When it rains, they have a lot of problem with leaky roofs. Also, their houses are kind of not properly ventilated, so they have a problem with smoke and proper air aeration in the house, which also been causing a lot of eye problems, and sometimes they even have chest problems because of a lot of smoke in the house.
These Maasai women are building permanent houses. The women work together, older women teaching the younger. The men are not involved. They are herding cattle.
The Maasai is a keeper of animals. So dung or cow dung is easily available. And if you look at that Maasai house, you only use posts, shrubs, dung, and anthill soil, which is easily available, which does not even need any technical thinking of how you are going to mix the two components. It's just a matter of you as a woman who's been brought up in that society, who's been trained to do that by your mother. It's easy for you to do it. For the traditional Maasai hut, it's strictly a woman who does it. The husband can only help to cut down the posts, but can never carry them home and can never build the house.
The style is traditional, but some of the building methods and materials are not. The roof has a cement surface, and rainwater will be channeled and collected in a container. It can then be used for washing and cooking. Building permanent houses is one thing, making a living is another. Using money that the tourists pay to come into the game parks, the Kenyan Wildlife Service has introduced the Maasai to a new way of life: tourism.
Tourism is one of the greatest economy of the Kenya that everybody relies on. So when a tourist comes in, They come to see the animals. And then what happens is that whatever money they pay to the Kenya Wildlife Services is the one that goes to help the projects in Maasai Land. So for tourism, we would still encourage it, because without them, then the Maasai, the national parks will also not be there.
Tourists are encouraged to visit the villages. They pay to watch the villagers.
When this tourist is coming to do sightseeing, he can stay in the Maasai land instead of even going to stay in a hotel, and pays a little fee to the owner of the ranch. So you find that the closeness between that tourist and the Maasai is no longer artificial. We encourage such because it's a direct trade, which nobody is trying to exploit the Maasai.
300, three, yeah. Three? Yeah.
Okay.
Then when you put like this, very nice feeling. Yeah, very nice. Yeah. Yes.
When the tourists have bought their souvenirs, they go back to their lodges or back to their hotels on the coast. The Maasai water their cattle before nightfall and begin to leave the park. Before dinner, the tourists watch and photograph the Maasai herdsman. Not one of the big five, perhaps, but still interesting. Tonight, there will be a cabaret at the lodge. The Maasai will dance and sing by the swimming pool. The tourists get their Maasai experience, but who really gains? Not the Maasai, who after earning a small amount for the cabaret are driven out of the park, land that used to be theirs.
The Teacher's Guide